The voice of growth. Mastering the mind and market. Timeless wisdom, proven strategies, and the deep work that creates lasting success. Like and subscribe to stay aligned with what truly drives results.
We're just going to go out here and stay focused, lock in, and do your best. And my best led to me winning the Olympic trials and then making it to Barcelona and was Olympic finalist. Leadership and building these young people into leaders and their families is as critical in this moment as anything. Now with NIL, they are now student athlete and CEO. NIL is seed money, right, for what you may want to do next. Whether you want to see yourself as such or not, Uncle Sam and the IRS want their money. If you don't build it from a place of authenticity and who you are, it won't be built to last. There's an ease when you're doing what you're born to do. If you're not grounded in who you are, then what others say drives you. And who are you when no one's clapping? All of the things that we've gone through and been through have just gotten us ready to get to this point. That I love people and was of service to them. That I helped them discover what they were born to do, and they did it. That I'm felt more than I was seen when I leave this earth. Interesting question.
Tanya, you competed at the Olympic level. You've won so many awards. I can't even begin to start listing them. But you competed in a time where the attention was on the athletics, was on the performance. And now you've got these microscopes. You've got social media. You've got cameras. You've got all these things that are on top of the athletes. How do you see them thriving through that situation?
That's a great question, Manny. And you're right. When I competed in Barcelona, which was also the first year of the Dream Team. So there were a lot of eyeballs. There just wasn't the social media aspect. And in today's time, anything you do can quickly become visible in a second. And so I'm glad there wasn't the social media around when I was coming up on that on one hand. But in terms of kids today in athletics, I think it really impacts their mental health if we were to really think about it. Because in a moment, there's so much to compare themselves to. And I like the quote that says, comparison is the thief of joy. And so we live in a time when young people are constantly online and engaged in such a way that their joy is lost. Many of them get depressed. Many of them are in this constant state of scrolling. And what they don't realize, right, oftentimes that's the highlight of someone's life, not the everyday life. And so I think there's a lot of pressure that can come with it. And also, not just from themselves, but also the fans. That has an impact. Everybody has a comment. People can be trolling. People can be stalking. So all of those things have been heightened because we are in the digital age and so much in terms of social media. So I think the pressures have intensified, and it really is a thing where sometimes you just have to get offline just for your own sanity and mental health.
So then you take that already pressured pressure cooker, right, or under pressure, and then you tighten it up more with this relatively new aspect of the NIL situation, right? So how do they deal with that? I mean, you're talking about kids and their families, you're very young athletes that are now being really challenged in some ways with these opportunities, right? What I mean by that is they're amazing opportunities, but with that, there's a cost. Right? And so that's what I want to get to.
Yeah. So that's one of the things that I often say when I talk about NIL, and even in my book, I talk about it. And that is the refrain of NIL can be a blessing or a curse, depending on the strategy. And not having one is actually a default strategy, right? And so to be able to maneuver it in this time, I think it's very important that parents are engaged when it comes to their kid. Oftentimes, I was a AAU travel mom with my daughter, also with my son, and there's a lot that happens just in being the student and the athlete. Now with NIL, they are now student athlete and CEO because when they receive NIL payments, those are taxable. They get 1099. They're independent contractors for the brands and the different sponsors that may give them NIL dollars. So how do they maneuver through it without someone like a parent or guardian helping them? It's difficult. They're managing.
Okay.
And who's to say that they're managing well? I have a student athlete, and I spoke to her recently, and she's done pretty well as it relates to NIL. And I'm like, well, how's your mom? Right? And she's like, oh, I want her to help. I want her to get involved. When I talk to her mom's like, oh, she has it. Right? Because you have also that age gap. So sometimes parents will be like, oh, that's just all social media or that's that technology stuff. I don't have time for it. Well, you really don't have time not to. So even though she's managing and she's done well, she could probably be doing even better if her family were around to help support her in this whole process.
Okay. Before we go into, I have so many questions.
Okay.
Before we dive in further, what is NIL?
Okay.
And just for our listeners and our viewers, and are you for it or against it?
Interesting question. So NIL stands for name, image, and likeness. And it's been around. Really, the right for publicity has been around for decades. It's just that now within the college context, as well as high school, student athletes have the opportunity to monetize their brands and therefore get paid. They're not supposed to get paid to play, right? They're not supposed to. It's only for the use of their name, image, and likeness or marketing. So back in the day when I was at Arizona competing, I couldn't have a booster take me to dinner. That would be a violation. I was on a Sports Illustrated for Kids trading card when I was in college, and they sold thousands of copies. The photographer got paid because they captured my image and sold it to the magazine. I couldn't get a dime. You couldn't even model. I had to wait until I finished my eligibility before I could do that because that would be marketing or endorsing a particular product or thing. So I would have lost my eligibility. Today, young people are to get paid for appearances. They can get paid for speaking, for the universities to use their name, image, and likeness. Many of them are getting institutional payments outside of third-party payments. So that's what NIL is. Am I for it? I'm for people having the opportunity to better their lives.
Mm-hmm.
I look at NIL, and that's how I teach it. NIL is seed money, right, for what you may want to do next. If I'd had the opportunity to earn NIL, I wouldn't have had to get a student loan for grad school, for business school, right? I grew up, my mother was a single mother. I grew up in Maryland, came all the way to Arizona. My mom couldn't afford to send me anything.
Yeah.
So my scholarship was it, even though it still wasn't enough to cover things at times. So it was tight. And that was one of the things when I was the chair of the National Student Athlete Advisory Committee that we brought forth to the NCAA board. That cost of attendance, scholarships still didn't fully cover cost of attendance for an athlete, but we couldn't work. If we worked, we lose our eligibility.
So
you kind of made it. And my mother, they said, made too much for me to get a Pell Grant. So there weren't those other options. And so am I for it? Yes, it can be a great opportunity, but you must steward it well. And that's what it's about as I'm educating and teaching. How do you steward this moment? Because it doesn't have to be a moment. It can actually help you build a legacy if you have a strategy.
Think like a CEO without losing your soul. Is one of the powerful messages in this book.
Mm-hmm.
I did some research. And why is that? I mean, first of all, tell us about the book, and I'm going to dive in. I have a lot of questions.
All right. Well, Suddenly CEO was birthed through my own experience with my son. Both of my kids played Division I. My daughter played basketball, and my son played football. And NIL in this current form came into effect in 2021. At that time, he was at an HBCU, and they were trying to figure out, compliance, collective, and all of that. So the resources within that context were very different when he transferred to, as a grad transfer to a, group of 5 school, that he was a face of that and his NIL opportunity increased. And so how it started was one thing that lit a fire in me, especially to want to write this book, was that at the end of January 2024, I'm divorced. And he was like, well, Mom, hey, I got some tax stuff from school. Who's claiming me this year? You or Dad? And so at that time, I'd been the interim CEO of a national trade association for underserved entrepreneurs. And so when I looked at the email, it was a 1099. So once again, we knew that he would get sponsorship, but I wasn't aware of this one. And so we received it and I'm looking at it. And we had just finished research at the organization I was leading on the impact of 1099 in the gig economy. So here I am seeing this 1099 and my son like, who's going to claim me? Well, based on the amount, those things, that may not be an option.
Yeah.
And so for me to be surprised by that, having over 20-something years in corporate, doing all these different things, is like now these kids are now suddenly CEOs. They didn't ask for it, and many of them aren't even aware of it, which is why I wanted to sound the alarm to parents and the kids that you got to shift your mindset, because whether you want to see yourself as such or not, Uncle Sam and the IRS want their money, and you are now designated as a small business.
I love that idea that you have to be prepared, but there's a lot of gray area. People don't understand this works. Seed money, I mean, that idea is really good as well, because if you look at the trajectory of, we'll say wisdom, quote unquote, you get a lot of wisdom the older you get, right? You kind of accumulate it. So some of these kids are 17, 18 years old, and now they're having to sort of face this, and their parents don't necessarily know what to do. And people around them don't know what to do. So this is a bit of a lighthouse for this particular group.
I'm really hoping that it is. I've done lots of talks. I've coached and consulted with families, with athletes. And the book is really an opportunity to get that into the world, right? Into the hands. Oftentimes, regardless of their career or professional level, I work with parents from a CDL driver all the way to attorneys and doctors, right? And even still, because of all the changes that seem to happen, they're trying to stay up on it. But life is lifing and things are busy, right? And so what I will say is the common theme is that the parent, they just don't want to make a mistake, right? And so my hope is, you can't get through everything in one book, but I at least wanted to give them a framework to begin to think about a game plan. And that's what I call it, a game plan, for them to have a strategy when it comes to this space so that it can really be a blessing, right? Instead of the curse that we talked about earlier.
Yeah, for sure. You've worked for IBM, Guidehouse, a bunch of other things, national organizations. Do you see any parallels between the corporate domain, the corporate ladder, the corporate framework, and all of these things happening with young athletes? I mean, is there a parallel there that can be bridged?
If there's a parallel, that's a great question. I think NIL is what I would say in corporate America is a disruptor to a landscape that happens in business, right? A disruption of new technology happens. And so we are trying to figure it out. We're trying to position ourselves accordingly. They're not the rules. It's not regulated quite to that degree in this maturity. And so you're kind of the wild, wild west is what they call it. So if there's a parallel, I think that happens with any new innovation or technology that comes into the world from a corporate perspective, and then you adjust. So let's bring that down to 17, even now, high schoolers can receive NIL. So let's just say 14-year-olds, right? In certain states, high schoolers can receive NIL. That this is now being thrown upon them as an opportunity. And yet there aren't the guardrails or the safety frameworks, perhaps, to really help them maneuver through it. There's still legislation happening. Nothing is really passed. But that's why the parents are even more critical to this moment, to be what I call a parent GM, to help them work through it. And then even they're not getting a lot of resources, which is why I also wrote the book for student athletes and their parents, because there aren't a lot of resources available for the parents to even begin to understand how they can support. So parallel of disruption, parallel of opportunity, but you don't have the experience or wisdom that a corporation would have in terms of their leadership. And so leadership and building these young people into leaders and their families is as critical in this moment as anything.
Sure. I have a friend whose ex-husband was an Olympian at 14. He played for the Yugoslavian team handball team.
Wow.
Way back in the day. And he basically was a professional athlete at 14, 15 years old. And he was getting paid at the time $75,000 to $100,000 a year, which was a lot of money back in 20.
Yeah.
And so I say this because there was stories that I heard that he basically, having all this money, then he decided to go in a different direction than his parents. And so there's a lot of issues that came up of that. So it's very interesting that we're, fast forward 25 years, that now this is like happening on a national scale. And it's going to be interesting to see how it all plays out.
For sure. And, I work the gamut in terms of this ecosystem. So, for example, when I have parents engage, oftentimes it's a referral. People are like, hey, Tanya's doing this. I think it might be good for you to talk to her, right? Because they have lots of questions. And once again, they don't want to make any mistakes, but also how I've approached it is it's a collaboration with parent and their kid in this. You can see stories where parents have, once again, this kid is coming into sudden money.
Yep.
And that sudden money now brings with it additional pressures as well. And how do they maneuver through this when they may be the first one to get their family out of a poverty situation? It's almost like a lottery winner, right? Almost the same type of thing can be at work for someone who now comes into large amounts of money. When you have a dynamic of divorce, one parent and another, how that kid moves, right? I was divorced as my kids, went through middle and high school and into college. And so that brings another layer of dynamic, especially if a kid is receiving money and how that dynamic, works. And people will be like, oh, the parents are taking advantage. Well, I think there are a lot more agents taking advantage than anything, right? People on the outside. So for every person that says, oh, the parent is just after this, I'm not saying that there aren't parents who are not. But my hope and the wisdom I share as a parent GM, you are trusted to protect and you're guided by love, right? And that should be the North Star, that every decision is one in which, okay, you've been given this child, this kid. So how does every person steward what's been given to them? You as the parent, the kid with the gifts, talents, and abilities. And even when I talk to them, I say, this is for more than just this moment. And so how do we train them up in this sort?
So your work centers on leadership, transformation, a lot of other things. In the student athlete domain, how do you balance self-worth with performance?
This is great that we can start with this, right? The book talks about moving from student athlete to CEO, which identity shift, right? A transition. Great question of self-worth, because if you don't know who you are, especially as you move into this world of NIL, and this is not just a statement for student athletes, any platform builder, entertainer, influencer, you have name, image, and likeness. You have it, right? If you're not grounded in who you are, then what others say drives you, right? they label you. And if you don't have a sense of self and identity, then as much as there is praise, as soon as the praise comes, also can come the bullying and the criticism. And if you don't know who you are, that can destroy you. And so I think this world, once again, like I said in the beginning, from a mental health standpoint, gives a lot more, adds a lot more pressure to this moment for a kid, which is why even more so I ask for parents to be involved. But this sense of self-worth and performance, it's something especially because I'm just thinking about even how I grew up, right? And performance and doing well was something that brought me praise, that also shielded me from some of the bullying that occurred because it shifted it. But there came a point that the praise stops, the applause stops. And who are you when no one's clapping?
Mm-hmm.
And if all you've been is performance driven, that can really spiral you into a deep depression when there's no one else there that's doing that.
Mm-hmm.
So understanding who you are is key and critical in whatever you decide to build or whatever platform you've been given. So I hope that gives you a perspective.
Yeah, I love the analogy of, I use this a lot of, life is like a book in some ways. There's different chapters.
Mm-hmm.
There's a story arc. You're kind of the center of your own book, but you've got characters come in. And I've interviewed lots of people, including more sort of off camera with folks. And one of the biggest things that I've heard from people, especially in their advanced age, late 80s, early 90s, is the idea of becoming irrelevant. It is, my own grandmother told me, she says, the worst thing that's happened, she goes, my body is my body. It's going to do what it's going to do. I mean, thankfully, she's still around. She's still running around. But she says that she feels more and more irrelevant every year.
Wow.
Her friends are dying. Just the world's passing by very quickly. But here's the catch with her, at least, and in my own way, sort of learning from her, is that she's redefining her identity all the time. And she has to. She was a restaurant owner. She was all these things. And now she's basically going into another kind of mode in her life in her, mid 90s. And she's still has that framework of like, what am I becoming? So, which is a good segue to my next question. Tell us the arc of your own story. From, growing up in Maryland, like, were you always an athlete? How did that all kind of come to be?
Okay. It's, you promise you're not going to laugh, right? So grew up in Maryland, as you said, was born in Baltimore. But part of my story is the fact that I was born to as a teenage mom who had been sent away to have me. And so that is a recent perspective that she and I have talked about. And so grew up in Maryland because I was born in Baltimore, but grew up in a small town called Lexington Park in Pax River, which is about an hour south of DC. And so how did I begin? One, from a performance standpoint, I did a talent show, singing in a talent show when I was in first grade at the library. And so once again, and then playing an instrument, right? But in terms of athletics, I would have been what you call a tomboy. I was the only child for 9 years, and then she had my sister. But I grew up with a bunch of cousins, boy cousins, who, didn't like the little girl cousin always saying, I want to play. And they would be like, all right, we're going to play tackle. I'm like, okay. And so I learned very quickly because they made sure I felt them. So after I learned the fact of, if they can't catch me, I don't get tackled. So I became a great catcher. I probably would have been a wide receiver if I played on a team because I found out that's how I'm not going to get tackled. But was a tomboy. But the first real reward in fourth grade, they had a thing in our county called the turkey races. And
this is the part where I don't laugh.
I'm going to see, you already started. So it was right before Thanksgiving, and they would have us by age groups, boys and girls ran together, and you had to run around a football field. And whoever was the first whoever got first won a turkey. So I won a turkey from my mom for that Thanksgiving and the one after it. Yeah, so the turkey races in St. Mary's County would have been my first race. And then in middle school, I played basketball. My middle school PE teacher was also our track coach. So then in high school, I played volleyball, basketball, and track. I also sang in the chorus. I played the saxophone in the marching band, jazz band, and even was a Black Sandra D in our school's show called Grease.
You were a performer all the way around.
Right, all the way around, which to then, go through high school, we had success in basketball and volleyball, but track was the thing that brought me to Arizona. And with that, great opportunity. I made my first U.S. junior team when I was 15, and so there wasn't a WNBA. We won our state championships in basketball my senior year. Woo! But there was no WNBA. But track had already opened up doors for me to travel around the world. And I loved the opportunity that I had coming to Arizona with one of the best coaches in the world for women's high jump, and then to go on and achieve the things that I've been able to do through sport. I know that it's not for nothing, and that my life now, right? All of the things that we've gone through and been through have just gotten us ready to get to this point. And none of it's wasted, is what I like to say. And in regards to your grandmother, right, being the age that she is, and that statement of being irrelevant, I think whenever someone's in transition, they question, right? There's this unsettled and uncertainty as they move in from one place to another in that transition. And so identity and knowing who you are has to be settled. Which is why the work with people on aligning identity, discovering or rediscovering identity, that then understanding their purpose. We were all designed and created for a purpose. And so your grandmother, abuela, right? Your grandmother, is reinventing herself. Well, her assignment has changed, is what I would say. She's still that woman who started that restaurant. The tenacity, the passion, the grit that it took. She still has it. Now it's a question of how does she express it at this age? And I would say you're part of her legacy. Oh, and because of that we never become irrelevant when we understand our power in terms of purpose and assignment, and that we pour in. So you're part of her legacy. She'll never be irrelevant, because she has you.
I love that. Yeah, it's very true. And I talk about her a lot. I talk about my mom. I talk about people in my life that have been just so much of a lighthouse that have gotten me through so many things. And also, this is part of why I do this podcast, is to share these stories as well of being able to fall, being able to fail, but basically taking from that and learning it so that you readjust. And I mean, you and I are about the same age. Like, we grew up with no social media. Mm-hmm. We had books. We had TV with the channels.
Go turn the channel. Yeah, with the pliers.
I had to go turn the channel, right? And so
exactly.
Things are moving so quickly.
Right.
Our kids have a different frame of reference than what we grew up with. Mm-hmm. And so there's so much there. Tell me about how you felt when you heard you were going to go to the Olympics.
Interesting story. I mean, it's all about stories, right? So I was a sophomore, and my freshman year, I'd won the indoor and outdoor national championships in the high jump. My freshman year, indoors, Bob, who's now the coach still here, was like, hey, it was in Indianapolis. You're a freshman. Just go have fun. And then I won. But it ended so late. The only thing to really celebrate was we went to Steak and Shake. Okay. And then outdoors, I won the outdoor nationals, and I set the American junior record, 6'4" ¼ that year. So going into my sophomore year, from a collegiate standpoint, I was, a lead in terms of jumping. But when it came to the Olympic team, even though that year I set the NCAA record, school record was 6'5.5", I was not selected. I was not picked to have made the team. So when they did their forecast, I wasn't, I was good, but I wasn't going to make the team because I was a 20-year-old. And so the trials were in New Orleans. The other thing that happened that year that a lot of people don't know is that Bob actually got a job and moved to California. And so I had a coaching transition. He was still helping with my workouts. And then right before the trials, I did get an opportunity to train with him a little bit before I went to New Orleans. But yeah, I got to New Orleans. And at the time, I was also dating someone that was picked to make the team. And then they didn't make the team. And I did.
Mm.
Yeah. So it was an interesting day in that when I got to the field for my final, I knew something had happened, but he never led on to the fact that he didn't make the team, like he wasn't going to make it. So I went and competed in everything. And then later on, that fate was solidified that he didn't make it, was picked to make it, and I did. What I appreciate is that he still celebrated me and went on to do some things at the Olympics, assisting, in some of the media aspects. But yeah, I wasn't supposed to make the team. And so, and maybe because I was young and you didn't think that I should, I think sometimes, that chip says, okay, we're just going to go out here and stay focused, lock in, and do your best. And my best led to me winning the Olympic trials and then making it to Barcelona and was Olympic finalist that year.
It's fantastic. I have the pleasure of knowing a couple of athletes at your level, and you guys are all very similar.
In what way?
You just have a certain sense about you that, the whole experience of literally being at the top of the human game for something like that, I think changes your mindset. If you know Lacey John, she's an Olympic swimmer, and she'll be on the podcast too.
Awesome.
And there's a few other folks that are just fantastic, right? But I love the way you say things about identity, because these are chapters of your life, right? You are now doing a lot of things. So let's talk about your business domain. What are you doing in the business world?
Well, in the business world, helping people reset to identity and their organizations, right? So I do a lot in regards to executive coaching and leadership development. I like to say that I'm an identity alignment architect. And that, once again, getting us back to who we really are so that we can build something that lasts. Right. And if you can, in this AI world, you can build a lot of things really quickly using it. But what I will say to you, if you don't build it from a place of authenticity and who you are, it won't be built to last. We compare ourselves, we'll imitate others. And so how do we build from identity? How do we understand our purpose? And then understand what we've been given to steward it appropriately. And so I get excited when I work with folks who are in transition. I work with a lot of C-suite founders, especially women, who are in transition and oftentimes around our age as well, because life isn't over, but the dynamics of life have changed. And so working with high capacity leaders, because so many are burnt out. And in this current landscape, that can be easy to do. And that's also one of the telltale signs that you need to get back in alignment. And so working with individuals to reset into that space of who they are is one of the first keys to getting to a place that you get a rhythm and flow of rest and work. And then in consulting, you're doing the same thing and helping companies adjust to these new times and in transition. So helping them recenter themselves on the soul of their company, right? Who they are. Because the corporate identity, right, is important as they look to build and grow their businesses. So excited about that and doing a lot of speaking. And now with the book coming out, we'll hope to do more of that. But really at the core of it is I'm a shepherd of leaders,
Love that.
right?
One of the major benefits, I believe, of social media, of this world that we live in now, is the dissemination of information.
Mm-hmm.
The whole identity conversation is something I talk about a lot on the
Mm-hmm.
podcast, constantly, because for me, it's been an eye-opening endeavor to understand that really drives so many things.
Mm-hmm.
It drives your goal engine, right? It drives your sense of self. It drives a certain level of peace. If you're operating in your own identity, you're not going to be conflicted inside. So many things. So I really like that you're sort of echoing that. And a very powerful message that I think needs to be told.
Well, you just hit on a key piece, right? And that is, for me, an indication that I am aligned in my assignment is peace. The moment I start pressing and striving and frustration is an indicator I'm out of alignment. And so peace is the guide, right? There's an ease when you're doing what you're born to do. There's an ease when you're, think of a car, right? Car is built to function in a certain way. And if you go off road in a Mercedes, the alignment can get off, right? What do? You take it to the shop because it's not functioning properly. We got to do that with ourselves. That when we're out of alignment, we must pause. And so the fact that you said peace, I would dare say that let that be the guide. Let that be the compass to whether or not you're moving and operating in the space that you've been designed to flow in.
Yeah, that's powerful. I have an ability, and we all do, to look across the table and kind of have a sense of when somebody's not in peace.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, a lot of people are really good actors. And
Yes.
you're not going to find that the expressions very easily.
Mm-hmm.
So I always talk about, as a leader myself,
Mm-hmm.
as also a host of this podcast, as what I do, a lot of what I do is centered on authenticity as well and vulnerability.
Mm-hmm.
I think vulnerability is a superpower.
It is.
And a lot of folks, especially men, I would
Mhm.
say, but women as well, but primarily men of my age, man, the way we were raised is like you just keep that iron door right there. You don't let anybody in.
Mm-hmm.
And then it manifests itself in depression, in bad health down the
Mhm.
road. You got to just get that stuff out. I mean, there's a power in that.
Mhm.
Do you believe that?
Absolutely. I absolutely believe that. I mean, I think we're conditioned. Yes, men, like you were just saying, men don't have the, sometimes they don't have or give themselves a freedom to express themselves. It happens with women too. I would say that oftentimes, though, we do the things we do and we perform at such high level because of trauma, whether it's to avoid it, right? We don't become vulnerable because we don't want to be exposed. And sometimes the overwork, one of the things I've found greatly, that my busyness was how I stayed safe. Because there were things that happened in my life growing up that to not be moving, to not be doing something, it wasn't safe. So we condition ourselves to be doers. But a couple of years ago, I got sick and was diagnosed with an inflammatory disease. And it's like, I'm healthy and all of these things. And I had to take a short-term leave for about 5 months. And I was like, okay, now I've never not worked. I mean, my first job was picking crabs in Maryland at 11. And so what that taught me, which is what I bring to the moments when I work with people, right, is I knew how to do, but I didn't know how to just be. And those 5 months, and it's ironic that I found a journal, and on the front, I journal every day. In the front of the journal that I found, it said, "Be still." My health forced me to be still. And it was one of the hardest and most uncomfortable feelings, especially in the beginning, but my body wouldn't let me. And in those times, my faith, my prayer, my getting an understanding of who Tanya is, not what Tanya does. And that's back to identity, right? So we have to allow ourselves and get to a point that we can just be, and being is not performing. And so when I find myself, say if there are things that I shift, and even coming here, right? Having an opportunity to speak with you, to talk about a lot of things, what I had to guide myself in is I'm not here to perform. What I am here to do is be present with you. And so that is the thing I aim for. With whatever I do, whomever I'm with, whatever's been assigned in my day, for Tanya to be present, not perform.
Yeah, that's amazing. That is right down the center of what we talk about with respect to part of it is the obstacle is the way. These are the Stoic principles, right? Which can coexist, by the way, with Christianity. They're not mutually exclusive, right? The other thing is amor fati, love your fate. We don't always choose the way we're going to live our life, right? When things present themselves, we got to just kind of work through them. So as we round out the podcast here, I have a couple of last questions. First of which is, what do you want your legacy to be?
That I loved people and was of service to them. That I helped them discover what they were born to do, and they did it. That I'm felt more than I was seen when I leave this earth.
That's great. Yeah, that question always makes me think about my own version of that, which changes. I like what you said about being felt. The impact we have on on humans is immeasurable. We can't count how that drop of a pebble in the pond is going to have ripples, and where those ripples are going to end up. And people call it the butterfly effect, if you will. I've had moments where things that I've said have sort of percolated. And I had a guy that I met about 4 or 5 months ago who was laid off. We connected, and he made a mention to me that, hey, listen, I've been listening to your podcast, and it's helped me kind of navigate these waters. And when you get fired or let go, that's a strike to your identity, right? And especially early in his career. As you get older again, wisdom sort of accumulates. So you're like, yeah, whatever. But when you're young, it's a big deal. And so I'm glad I was able to do that. Final question. If you had the ability to spend half a day with somebody, dinner, glass of wine, whatever, who would that be and why? At any point in time, anybody, dead or alive, anybody.
Michelle Obama.
Yeah.
Yeah. And somebody asked me that question a couple of weeks ago in something, but that's always been the answer since she and President Obama were in the White House. And it comes from a place of that when I see her, I see me. And so she is that person. And I recently watched her Netflix special, Becoming, when she was doing her book tour. And just some of the similarities. Oftentimes you're the only in a space. And at the end of the day, you see yourself reflected. Hard work, tenacity, driven, but a lover of people and wanting to be of service to others, even when it's of discomfort to you. Right. And so, I'd love to kick it with Michelle. I think we'd have fun. I see she likes to dance. I like to dance. It's going to happen.
Make it happen.
Yeah. Oh, it'll happen. It's coming. Don't know when, but it'll happen.
So final thing here is tell us about the book. Tell us when it comes out, and how can people learn more about you?
Well, the book Suddenly CEO is actually available right now. Pre-order. And it's publicly available on August the 2nd. And so I hope to be back in the city with some launch events around that. But we'll be doing promotion and touring with that leading up to that space. And to learn more about me, you can go to tanyahughes.com and listen to this podcast. Learn a little bit about me. But yeah, that's me.
Thanks so much. This has been insightful as ever.
It's been beautiful. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely.
Cheers.